The night was quiet in Cedar Grove when David Miller, a single father, heard a trembling whisper that froze him in his tracks. "Don't hurt me, please." He turned toward the alley, only to find not just a bruised woman, but also a small boy clutching her hand, his eyes wide with fear. That moment would unravel secrets, dangers, and a truth that would change David's life forever. Cedar Grove was a small town tucked between endless cornfields and highways leading to the city. Neighbors knew each other by name, by the way they waved from porches, by familiar smiles in the grocery store. White-painted houses lined the streets, picket fences standing like quiet sentries of routine. Old pickup trucks sat in driveways, collecting dust and rust like badges of history. To outsiders, Cedar Grove seemed perfectly safe, too ordinary for anything dramatic. But beneath that calm surface, secrets waited like cracks beneath fresh paint. David Miller had lived here all 36 years of his life. His hands were rough, scarred by years of fixing engines under the dim lights of Joe's auto shop. He was a mechanic by trade, not wealthy, but known for his honesty. If a customer couldn't pay, he'd still fix their car, trusting that good would come back someday. People in town respected him, though he rarely asked for respect. Quiet, steady, carrying the kind of strength that spoke louder than words. 3 years ago, tragedy had split his life in two. Laura, his wife, had been killed in a car accident, leaving him with a broken heart and a little girl to raise alone. The 2-bedroom house that once felt crowded with laughter now echoed with emptiness. He taught himself to cook, to fold laundry, to braid his daughter's hair, though he never stopped feeling out of place in those roles. The photographs of Laura on the wall seemed to watch over them, a reminder of a love too great to forget. David carried his grief quietly, but it shaped every step he took. Ellie, his 8-year-old daughter, was the light in the darkness. Her curly hair bounced when she laughed, freckles dusting her cheeks like stars. She asked questions that made him stumble, questions about life, about her mother, about why things had to be the way they were. Yet her innocence softened the edges of David's sorrow. Every evening, she ran to greet him after work, wrapping her little arms around his oil-stained shirt. She didn't know it, but she was the reason he kept going, the reason he believed there was still beauty in the world. Their small house stood at the end of a quiet street, its shingles weathered, its floors creaking with every step. Inside, it held warmth, the smell of pancakes on Saturday mornings, the sound of cartoons echoing from the living room. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, a fortress of love in a world that often felt unforgiving. Laura's touch lingered everywhere, in the faded scarf still draped over a chair, the books left on a shelf, the dried flowers she once arranged. David knew the house wasn't perfect, but to Ellie, it was home. In towns like Cedar Grove, gossip spread faster than the morning paper. People whispered about David, about the hardship of raising a daughter alone, about how he hadn't looked at another woman since Laura. A few had tried to reach him, to fill the void, but he always turned away. Love, he believed, was something he had already given completely. Instead, he poured everything into Ellie, making sure she never felt the absence that weighed so heavily on him. The town pitied him, admired him, but they didn't really know him. Money was always the shadow trailing him. Bills stacked on the kitchen table, school expenses, repairs for his old truck. It was a puzzle with missing pieces. Many nights he sat in silence, staring at numbers that never added up. Yet when he peeked into Ellie's room and saw her asleep, curled under a blanket with her stuffed rabbit, his resolve hardened. "Tomorrow, I'll try harder," he would whisper to himself. And that was how he survived, one day at a time, fueled by love and quiet determination. That September evening, the air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves. David and Ellie walked home from the corner store, carrying milk and bread in a brown paper bag. Ellie swung his hand, humming a tune she had learned at school. The street was quiet, almost too quiet, as they passed the alley beside the laundromat. And then it came, a voice, faint, trembling, heavy with fear. "Don't hurt me." David stopped cold, his heart pounding. He didn't know it yet, but that whisper would tear apart the fragile piece of their lives. David froze, gripping the grocery bag tighter as his ears strained toward the alley. The voice came again, soft and broken, like a prayer swallowed by the wind. He glanced down at Ellie, whose wide eyes mirrored his unease. "Stay right here, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice firm but calm. He set the bag down on the sidewalk, his body already moving toward the shadows. Something deep inside told him this was no ordinary cry. The alley smelled of damp brick and spilled detergent from the laundromat. Under the flickering light of a dying street lamp, he saw her. A woman crouched low against the wall, arms wrapped protectively around a small boy. Her face was bruised, one eye swollen, her lips split. The boy clung to her shirt, trembling, his wide brown eyes darting to David with terror. For a moment, time itself seemed to stop. "Please, don't hurt us," the woman whispered again, her voice cracking. She flinched as David stepped closer, as if expecting a blow. He lifted both hands slowly, palms open. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly. "You're safe." Behind him, Ellie's small voice called out nervously, "Daddy, who are they?" The woman pulled the boy closer, trembling even harder. David's heart twisted. He wanted to retreat, to pretend he hadn't seen, but something in her eyes pinned her there. They weren't just eyes of fear, they were eyes of someone who had nowhere left to go. "What's your name?" he asked gently. Her lips trembled. "Rachel," she murmured. She glanced at the boy. "This is Noah." His little fingers dug into her sleeve like anchors. Ellie had edged closer, unable to resist her curiosity. "Hi," she whispered to Noah, giving him a shy smile, but the boy only buried his face into Rachel's coat. Rachel's body stiffened, her gaze flicking nervously toward the mouth of the alley, as though expecting someone to appear at any moment. David noticed, and his gut tightened. Whoever she was running from could still be near. "You can't stay here," David said firmly, though not unkindly. "It's not safe." He glanced at Ellie, then back at Rachel. "Come with me. Just for tonight. I won't ask questions." Rachel hesitated, her whole body shaking, torn between fear and trust. Then, finally, she nodded, rising shakily to her feet. The boy's small hand slipped into hers as if clinging to the last thread of hope. At the house, David poured hot tea while Rachel sat at the kitchen table, still trembling. Ellie hovered nearby, staring at Noah with wide-eyed fascination. Rachel's voice cracked as she spoke, barely louder than a whisper. "I left him, my husband. He almost killed me this time." Her hands tightened around the cup, knuckles white. I had to run, for Noah." David's chest tightened with a mix of anger and pity. He'd heard stories of abuse before, but sitting across from Rachel made it different, real. "You're safe here tonight," he told her, his voice low but steady. Ellie tugged at his sleeve, whispering, "She can stay, Daddy, can't she?" But David said nothing. He stared at Rachel, at Noah, and at the storm he felt gathering around them. He didn't know it yet, but letting her inside was the first step into a danger that would change all their lives. The next morning, the house was silent, except for the ticking of the kitchen clock. When David walked in, the teacup still sat on the table, half full, cold. Rachel and Noah were gone. A folded note lay beneath the cup, the handwriting shaky. "Thank you. Don't look for us. You'll only be in danger." David stood frozen, the words pressing heavy on his chest. Ellie patted in, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, where did they go?" she asked, her voice soft. David swallowed hard, unable to give her an answer that made sense. "They had to leave, sweetie," he whispered, brushing her hair back. But the unease lingered like a shadow that wouldn't lift. He knew this wasn't the end of it, not with the fear he'd seen in Rachel's eyes. Life returned to its routine, or at least it tried to. David fixed cars, cooked dinners, tucked Ellie into bed. Yet Rachel's face haunted him, appearing in quiet moments like a ghost. Sometimes he'd catch Ellie staring out the window as though waiting for Noah to return. "Do you think they're okay?" she'd ask. David would force a smile, but deep down he wasn't sure. Then, strange things began to happen. At the shop, he noticed a black sedan idling across the street 2 days in a row. The driver never came in, never looked his way, just sat there, watching. At night, David thought he heard footsteps outside, crunching softly on gravel, though when he opened the door, the yard was empty. His instincts told him the peace of Cedar Grove was cracking. One afternoon, Ellie came home from school unusually quiet. When David pressed her, she finally whispered, "A man asked my teacher about me. He said he knew you." David's stomach dropped, fear washing over him in a wave. He hugged her tightly, forcing himself not to let her see the panic in his eyes. Whoever Rachel was running from, they were getting closer. The unease grew heavier with each passing day. Neighbors gossiped about strangers in town, unfamiliar cars on familiar streets. David started locking the doors earlier, keeping Ellie closer, walking her to school instead of letting her ride the bus. He could feel it now. Danger wasn't just out there somewhere. It was circling them, closing in, step by step. At night, David lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the weight of responsibility pressing on him. He had promised Ellie safety, but now, even within their small house, he wasn't sure he could keep it. Rachel's warning echoed in his mind. "Don't look for us. You'll only be in danger." And yet, it didn't matter. Danger had already found them. Then came the knock. It was late, rain pelting the windows, thunder rumbling across the sky. David froze in the living room, Ellie asleep on the couch beside him. Slowly, he rose and approached the door, heart hammering. When he pulled it open, there she was, Rachel, soaked, trembling, clutching Noah in her arms. And in her eyes, he saw something far worse than fear, desperation. Rachel stood on the porch, water dripping from her hair, Noah clinging to her side like a shadow. "I had nowhere else to go," she whispered, her voice hoarse, nearly drowned by the storm. David stepped back, motioning them inside without hesitation. Ellie stirred awake and, upon seeing Noah, leapt up with joy. The boy gave a timid smile before burying his face again. David shut the door, knowing this choice would cost him more than he could imagine. Days turned into weeks, and Rachel slowly folded herself into their lives. She helped Ellie with math homework, cooked meals when David worked late, and kept the little house warmer than it had felt in years. Noah and Ellie grew close, sharing toys and laughter, filling the air with a kind of light David hadn't heard since Laura. For the first time in years, he felt the hollow spaces in his home begin to close. Yet Rachel's smile never reached her eyes. At night, David sometimes heard muffled sobs from the spare room. One evening, as Rachel reached for her backpack by the couch, it tipped over. Paper spilled out, an envelope stuffed with cash, a passport that bore her face but another name. David froze, staring at the evidence. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice low, dangerous. Rachel's eyes widened, her hands trembling as she scrambled to gather the items. "It's not what you think," she whispered, but David's trust had cracked. Later, when Ellie was asleep, David confronted her in the kitchen. The storm outside rattled the windows, but the storm inside was far louder. "You brought this into my house," he said, voice tight with anger. "Who are you really, Rachel?" She broke, tears streaming down her bruised cheeks. "If I tell you everything, you'll wish you never found me." David's jaw clenched. "Tell me anyway." Silence stretched before the truth came spilling out. Rachel revealed the darkness she had been hiding. Her husband wasn't just abusive. He was part of a criminal network laundering money, destroying lives in shadows. She had stolen evidence, documents, recordings that could put him away for good. That was why he hunted her. The envelope of cash was for survival, the passport for escape. "I thought I could disappear," she whispered, "but he's too powerful. He has people everywhere." David felt the weight of her words pressing on him like chains. Every instinct screamed to protect Ellie, to throw Rachel out, to lock the door and walk away. But then he looked at Noah, sleeping on the couch with Ellie's stuffed rabbit clutched in his hand. "And the boy?" David asked quietly. Rachel's tears fell harder. "He's not his son. I took him. I couldn't leave him behind. He was going to be sold." The room spun around David. Cedar Grove, his safe little town, suddenly felt like the center of a nightmare. He wanted to yell, to demand why she dragged him into this. But beneath the anger was something else. Admiration, even awe. Rachel wasn't just running from pain. She was running with courage, carrying a child who wasn't hers because no one else would. It was reckless, dangerous, but it was human. Rachel's final words that night burned into him. "If you let me stay, you'll be in his sights too. And once he finds us, he'll never stop." David looked at her, then at Ellie asleep on the couch, and felt the ground shift beneath him. His quiet life was gone. In its place stood a choice: to walk away from Rachel and Noah, or to stand and fight against a storm far bigger than Cedar Grove. David barely slept after Rachel's confession. Every creak of the old house sounded like an intruder. He found himself double-checking locks, pacing by the window long after Ellie and Noah had drifted to sleep. The weight of her secret pressed on him, squeezing the air from his chest. He knew danger was no longer a distant threat. It was circling them, closer every day. The quiet town of Cedar Grove no longer felt safe. One morning, he arrived at the shop to find black smoke curling into the sky. Flames clawed at the roof of his garage, tools melting into twisted shapes. Neighbors stood in clusters, whispering, but David didn't need to ask. This wasn't an accident. Someone had sent a warning. As he watched the fire consume years of work, he realized his life was already under siege. There was no turning back. At home, Rachel's face paled when he told her. "He knows," she whispered, her hands shaking around a coffee mug. "He's getting closer." Her eyes darted to Noah, who was building blocks with Ellie on the floor. "He'll use anyone. He'll use the children." David felt a chill crawl up his spine. Until now, his fight had been about protecting Rachel. Now, it was about saving their kids. Rachel admitted the truth she had kept hidden. Her husband's reach stretched far. Corrupt cops, men with badges who answered to his money, not the law. "We can't trust anyone," she said, her voice breaking. "If we go to the wrong person, he'll find us before we even speak." David's world tilted. He had grown up trusting the uniforms in this town, but now every siren, every patrol car made his stomach twist. Determined, David began helping Rachel gather and sort through the evidence she carried. At night, they sat at the kitchen table, scanning documents, making copies, storing them in secret places around the house. His hands shook as he held papers filled with names, bank accounts, ledgers of crimes that stretched far beyond Cedar Grove. The weight of it terrified him, yet he couldn't walk away, not anymore. Then came the scariest moment of all. Ellie and Noah didn't return from school one afternoon. David's heart thundered as he tore down the streets, searching, calling their names. Minutes felt like hours until Mrs. Connors, the elderly neighbor, waved him over. The children were huddled in her backyard, shaking. Through sobs, Ellie whispered, "A man followed us. He asked for our names." Rage and fear boiled inside David like fire. That night, he sat at the kitchen table, scanning into Rachel's eyes. "We can't keep running," he said firmly. His voice was low, but the decision behind it was unshakable. "If we do nothing, he'll find us. If we fight back, maybe, just maybe, we can end this." Rachel's tears glistened under the dim light, her face a mixture of fear and hope. For the first time, she didn't look like a victim. She looked like someone ready to fight. And so the line was drawn. They weren't just a mechanic, a widow, and 2 children anymore.
They had become a family, bound by survival, by secrets, by the need to stand against a monster. David knew the storm was almost here. He could feel it in his bones, like thunder rumbling before the lightning strikes. And when it came, he vowed he would be ready.
Sunday morning dawned with a fragile calm. The children played in the yard, their laughter floating through the open windows. For a brief moment, David let himself believe they could still have a normal life. He stood on the porch with a mug of coffee, breathing in the cool air, trying to forget the storm circling them. But deep down, he knew peace was only the silence before the strike. His chest tightened when the sound of an engine shattered the quiet. A black truck rolled slowly into the driveway, its tires crunching against gravel like the march of doom. Rachel froze at the window, the plate in her hands slipping, shattering on the floor. "It's him," she whispered, her face draining of color. David's grip on the mug turned to stone as he set it aside. The driver's door opened, and a tall man stepped out, broad-shouldered, eyes burning with fury. 2 others followed, shadows of menace at his back. "Rachel," the man growled, his voice dripping venom. "You really thought you could hide? You thought this loser could protect you?" He smirked at David, his contempt sharp as a blade. Ellie clung to her father's leg, trembling, while Noah buried his face in Rachel's coat. David stepped forward, shielding them. "You need to leave," he said, voice steady but fierce. His heart pounded like a war drum in his chest. The man sneered, his gaze sliding toward Ellie. "Then maybe I'll take the girl instead. She looks like a sweet little thing." Rachel's scream cut through the air. "No!" Her voice cracked, raw with terror. The man lunged, and the world collapsed into chaos. David met him head-on, fists colliding with flesh, the crash of bodies against metal ringing through the yard. The fight was brutal and unrelenting. David slammed into the hood of the truck, pain shooting through his ribs, but he refused to fall. Every punch he threw carried the weight of protecting his daughter, of protecting this broken family he hadn't asked for but now couldn't live without. Behind him, Rachel shouted, trying to shield the children as the thugs circled closer. The world became a blur of fists, shouts, and fear. Ellie screamed David's name, her voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. With a roar, he shoved the man back, blood trickling from his lip. But the enemy was relentless, surging forward again, determined to break him. Just as David faltered, Rachel's voice rang out, clear and desperate. "Stop!" she cried, holding up her phone. From its speaker came a recording, his voice. The man's own words, cold and undeniable, plans of money laundering, of trafficking, of crimes too dark to ignore. The thugs froze, glancing uneasily at each other. The man's fury twisted into panic, his mask cracking for the first time. Sirens pierced the air, wailing closer, louder, echoing off every house on the street. Neighbors had already spilled onto their lawns, whispering, recording with phones. Red and blue lights flashed across the yard as black SUVs screeched to a halt. Armed agents poured out, surrounding the truck in seconds. Rachel clutched Noah and Ellie, tears streaming down her face, as the man was shoved to the ground in handcuffs, screaming threats that dissolved into the roar of sirens. David collapsed onto the porch steps, his chest heaving, his knuckles raw. It was over, or so it seemed. The storm had broken, but the aftermath was only just beginning. And as Rachel knelt beside him, their eyes met in a silence heavier than words. The yard slowly emptied after the chaos, neighbors retreating to whisper behind curtains. The flashing lights faded as the SUVs carried Rachel's husband and his men away. For the first time in months, the air felt lighter, though David's body still shook with exhaustion. He sat on the porch steps, staring at his bruised hands, wondering how his quiet life had come to this. Then Ellie nestled beside him, her small hand slipping into his. "We're safe now, Daddy,"
she whispered. Rachel emerged from the house, Noah clutching her hand tightly. Her eyes were swollen from tears, but for the first time, she didn't look like prey. She looked free, though fragile, like glass that had been cracked but not shattered. She knelt in front of David, her voice trembling. "You didn't have to do this for us." He shook his head, meeting her gaze. "Yes, I did, because no one else would." In the days that followed, the town buzzed with rumors, but beneath the gossip lay respect. People who once pitied David now saw him as more than a quiet mechanic. They saw the man who stood against something far bigger than Cedar Grove. Rachel met with federal agents, handing over every shred of evidence she had carried. For the first time in years, she no longer had to look over her shoulder every second of the day. Life began to rebuild itself in small, tender steps. Rachel found part-time work at the library, her love for books helping her breathe again. Noah thrived beside Ellie, their laughter weaving through the house like a new kind of music. The scars remained, but so did the hope. And each night, when they sat down to dinner, David felt something he thought he had lost forever, a sense of family. One evening, as Rachel painted quietly at the kitchen table, she looked up and whispered, "You saved us." David smiled faintly, shaking his head. "No, Rachel, you saved yourself. I just gave you a place to land." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't from fear. They were from gratitude, from the fragile joy of a second chance. Ellie, ever wise beyond her years, summed it up best one night as she set the table. "Daddy, sometimes people are gifts. We just don't know it when they arrive." David stared at her, struck by the truth in her simple words. He glanced at Rachel and Noah, their presence filling the house with warmth. Maybe, just maybe, fate had sent them here for a reason. The past couldn't be erased, Laura's absence, Rachel's suffering, Noah's fear, but the future could be written anew. Together, they had faced a storm and survived. Together, they had built something fragile but real. David realized that family wasn't always about blood. It was about love, about choosing to stand beside someone when the world turned against them. And that choice had changed everything. So, in Cedar Grove, under the same creaky roof, 4 broken souls found healing. Out of whispers of pain grew the sound of laughter, of trust, of new beginnings. And in the silence of the night, David often remembered that voice in the alley. "Don't hurt me." It had been a plea, a warning, and ultimately, a gift. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe for more inspiring stories like this. Because sometimes the quietest whispers can lead to the loudest truths.